Hey everyone, I'm Jörgen Vedeler and welcome to Unlock the Logos, my new YouTube channel. And my intention with this channel is to explore and share my Christian life as an artist and to invite you to think and reflect on the life of Jesus, the wonders of scripture, biblical symbolism, and how that relates to reality and current societal issues. And in my previous talk, which I haven't uploaded on YouTube, but anyhow, I touched on Babel and the story of how that plays out. As I understand that story, it's about the sin of attempting or trying to account for everything of reality without God. And that's when power, pride, and totalitarianism start lurking. And well, I think that's something we can actually see happening here in the West, even a soft kind of totalitarianism. And so in this episode, I'd like to talk about love versus pride. I'd also like to speak a little more about heaven and earth and what those concepts are in the minds of those who wrote it. At least, I started to learn a little about ancient ways of thinking, an ancient way of thinking about this Hebrew texts. I'm also gonna talk about something that's called the 4 P's of knowing. It's a concept by a cognitive scientist called John Vervaeke. He's from Canada. And then also I'd like to dive into some Babylonian cosmology, and I will play an excerpt from the Bible Project and their podcast. So when it comes to Babel, there's a rabbi whose name is Soloveitchik. I believe that's how it's pronounced. And he said about Babel this: "This society is ruled by power-hungry men who want to possess and own the individual, or rather to deprive the individual of his soul, to depersonalize him and convert him into a machine, into an object." That's actually something that we're gonna hear later on in this episode, where the Bible Project will explain this. It is out to organize and convert mankind into an army and to introduce uniformity. It does not believe that each individual has his own approach to life and his own unique talents. The builders of Tower of Babel depersonalized man so thoroughly that they would ignore a man who fell off the building, but would cry when a stone or a brick fell. And I also believe that Babel quenches faith in that which is higher than ourselves. And one of the consequences of not believing in anything that is higher than our own realities, than our own subjective realities, let's say, is that we tend to weaponize virtues in order to acquire power for ourselves. And this is an observation that Jonathan Peugeot has made. And so there's this tendency to weaponize compassion and be virtue signaling, let's say, and belong to a woke movement. I think people do this in order to feel like they're part of a group, and in that way they'd be safer. But it might be also about manipulation and just the requirement of power for yourself. And a beautiful or a good example of this weaponization of compassion, of that virtue, let's say, is in the story of Judas and the sinful woman. And Judas there tries to weaponize compassion for his own sake in order to acquire power. And he does this by saying that the expensive oil that was poured over Jesus by the woman, the sinful woman in this case, could have been sold and thus become a blessing to the poor. It sounds like a Christian thing to do, but it's a school of thought that excludes Christ from Christianity. The attempt to create Christianity without Jesus ultimately stems from pride and lack of reverence and love for God. Tolkien wrote this. The shadow that bred them can only mock, it cannot make, not real new things of its own. And I believe that healthy hierarchies are founded on love, truth, and beauty. Christ embodied all of these three. He is the good shepherd who cares for his sheep. A healthy hierarchy affords us to be humble, selfless, explorative, trusting, loyal, and the list of good qualities goes on. It affords such virtues because the paramount source to this structure is inexhaustible and caring in nature, as it allows for both unity and multiplicity to coexist in harmony. Jonathan Peugeot taught me that love is what holds the one and the many together. Just like a basketball team is held together by the mutual care of its purpose, which is one, and the team members, the many. So the team is held together by this mutual care of its purpose, which is one thing, and it's heavenly, let's say, because it's in the minds, it's unseen. I believe that God is the head, reason, and mystery to an exhaustibility that lets us grow no matter how old and experienced we are. This is also why faith is essential to participate in the life and the body of Christ, and thus be one of his children. Faith is believing in that which is not yet seen. It can also be explained as trust in hidden things or things above us. So I'm gonna go into heaven and earth. In the Bible, heaven and earth are the unseen and the seen. When they meet as the one unseen identity or idea, let's say, is supported by the many stuff of the earth and thus receives a gestalt, or as you see here in the model to my left here, there is heaven and earth that meet, and this gestalt or symbol or manifestation emerges. And then our consciousness will judge it, whether it's good or bad. This is what consciousness is for. I believe that a human is made of the stuff of the earth and the breath of God. So a human is basically the seen and the unseen, heaven and earth. Thus we have the capacity for language and abstract thought. In the Garden of Eden, heaven and earth mirrored each other, but then became separated, and thus we strayed away from the glory of Eden and from our relationship with God. And lately I've been thinking about the term incarnational thinking, which to me seems to be about the aspiration to bring God's heavenly or unseen kingdom down to earth, so that we can experience his glory and beauty in all seen things possible. I think this incarnational thinking was probably more common in the medieval times and a few centuries back, when we constructed more architectural beauty that was inspired by the divine. And that the idea that you could worship God in architecture, and now we have a philosophy that's more tilted towards functionality. And this is what the city in the last book of Scripture is describing. It's a very beautiful city. And I believe that there's an ethic to the beauty of Christ which is meant to seduce us more than the temptations of this world. And, well, it becomes a challenge to be tempted by God if there's... Slight correction here. Not tempted, but I meant seduced by God. If there's no beauty in this world, other than, entertainment and pornography and stuff. And so we need to be also saved by Christ, the beauty of Christ, and to fall in love with the Christian message, the Christian story, not only as in text, but maybe more than propositional knowing, which is what we're gonna go into in a moment. And when it comes to music, music is very important to us, and it's the direct representation of the unseen. And I think that good music harmonizes invisible patterns in a profound manner, and thus listening to profound music often is regarded as a religious experience. The religious has a capacity to move us and even transform our being. And this is probably why I've pursued dance as a profession and interest. Music is unseen and it moves through air, or as we now understand, it belongs to a heavenly sort of realm of air, breath and mind and consciousness. My body allows me to support the unseen patterns of the music and capture them to experience a state of flow, delight, presence, and enchantment. So actually I'm also at the moment listening to Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien's great work on audiobook, and it's an enchanting experience which fills my mind with wonder and awe, and that's something I think is essential to life. I wouldn't want to have a Christian life without the enchantment of the mystery of God as well, and then his richness, the fullness of his glory. And we get hints of that watching nature and being in nature. And I think also music has a capacity to capture the mysteries and the wonders of his creation. But something I also mentioned in my last video, now I'm gonna come into the 4 P's of knowing.
If we want to grow, build our capability, accomplish what we're going for, it seems obvious to say that we're going to need to know things. But then when you think about it, the most knowledgeable people aren't always those who seem to be thriving. And in our own lives, if we're really honest, getting new knowledge doesn't always unlock us when we're stuck. So is it that knowing doesn't matter, or is there something we don't know about knowing? And if we do want to grow and learn, how do we go about getting the kind of knowledge that will really help us? My name's Rich Watkins from Let's Go, and I'm interested in how we accomplish things with others in complex environments, collaboration, and how we develop our own mastery and share it with the world, leadership. In this video, I want to shine a light on the work of cognitive scientist Vervaeke from the University of Toronto. Now, his work is incredibly rich with loads of applications, but for my purposes, I just want to explore one fragment of his thinking. He says that we often have too narrow an appreciation of knowing, focusing too much on one or two kinds of knowing, but to live well in a complex world, we need to effectively engage with 4 kinds of knowing. And perfectly, they all begin with a P. The first kind of knowing he describes is the one that we usually talk about, knowing knowledge. And he calls it propositional knowing because it's the kind of knowing that exists in books where there are propositions, facts, beliefs, concepts, rules. It's how we win an argument, persuade someone of something, or describe a theory. It's thinking knowing, knowing about things. In science, philosophy, history, management, we are in this business of knowing what is true. And if we build this kind of knowing, we become knowledgeable, which is good for lots of things, but it is insufficient. Because we also need to know how to do things. And the second P is procedural knowing. This kind of knowing is knowing the procedures that achieve results. And it doesn't get us truth, it gets us power. An easy way to see it is the difference between knowing lots about bikes and knowing how to ride a bike. You see, this procedural knowing gives us the power to ride around. And we all know people with great theory, but can't turn it into great practice. And with procedural knowing, it's getting that embodied sense of how specific actions reliably get us specific results. And we call these skills. And building our procedural knowing, building our skills, we become experts. Okay, so imagine a person learns a lot about hammers and becomes very skillful with using one. This is useful, but is every problem a nail? We might need another kind of knowing that sees the situation we find ourselves in and knows what skills are appropriate. Vervaeke calls this perspectival knowing. It's not about knowing the truth or knowing how to enact something, it's knowing how to perceive the world, how to take it all in from our perspective. And with this, we will know how things feel and we can appreciate then what really matters or sense what is needed in the situation. It's not just thinking about our perspective, but really inhabiting it, getting a taste for how things appear to us. The result of perspectival knowing is presence, and with presence, we also appreciate the limits of our perspective and the value of other perspectives.
That's important.
We become more aware. We see how things fit together. We put things in perspective. We become perceptive. And then there's a fourth kind of knowing that's not about seeing, but being. The P is participatory knowing. Knowing our place in the world, being in a right relationship with the arena we're operating in, being in a dynamic connection with other people who have their own perspectives, and being in flow with what's around us. Notice how different it feels when you're out of sorts in a situation versus when you're really at home or in the groove in a situation. When we know how to participate in an arena, we can see what is relevant and anticipate what is next, and we can improvise with little or no self-doubt or hesitation because we aren't thinking about it, we know it. And with this kind of knowing, we're not just observing the world, we're impacting it, but not in that simple procedural sense. We are dancing with the situation, both influencing and being influenced. And here we can handle complexity and ambiguity and novelty. We can face things with good humor because we're at home in the arena. Building our participatory knowing, we become co-creators with life. So there we have 4 kinds of knowing. Knowing about things, propositional knowing. Knowing how to do things, procedural knowing. Knowing how to perceive the world, perspectival knowing. And knowing how to relate to the world, participatory knowing. These last 2 Ps might sound like very advanced kinds of knowing, maybe reserved for great masters. But in fact, they're the foundations. Kids generally know how to participate in the world and how to be present to what they experience before they know how to do things or think about things. And here's where I see these distinctions as useful for us. You see, we all have a lot to learn, and often we know that we need to develop our leadership, our collaboration, how we navigate change, build resilience, creativity, vision, influence. But learning isn't just about acquiring new knowledge and new skills. Sometimes we need new lenses to look through, new ways of listening to the world. Sometimes we need new frames of mind that help us participate in the world differently. And this kind of learning isn't about striving for hidden knowledge or hidden processes that will get us the things we want. It's more like a settling in. Can we settle in to seeing and sensing the world more deeply? Being more present and perceiving what is really going on, listening to the perspectives of others without worrying whether we have everything right. Can we settle in to a more comfortable participation in the arenas we're operating in, becoming aware of the complexity and ambiguity, but not trying to plot the perfect path through it that doesn't exist, instead making friends with the situation? And if we can perceive this distinction, maybe we can participate in our learning and our growth in a more useful, grounded way.
Yeah, the presence part, I think it's essential to enjoy all of the blessings we ask for. And I wish to have a life in which I'm content with every situation, and kind of like Paul is talking about that, also known as Saint Paul. He's learned how to be content in all phases of his life, in hard phases and in phases of prosperity and success. I think peace with God is essential now, to have that presence, to have a mind that is susceptible to life, and the, how to say, the beautiful complexity of life in a good way, that we shouldn't have too much complexity in life. You know, that's what lies actually contribute with, that they increase complexity. But I'm thinking more of the complexities that, you know, if you taste a good food or a good drink, and you can you know, sense all of its all of the flavors, you know, that you have to be present in order to do that. And that's what I'm referring to. And when it comes to, you know, when it comes to dance, for my part, is that, you know, I capture, like I said, the moment of the music, but that only happens if I'm present. And so I participate basically in the patterns of the music and its meaning, and then I'm in a sort of participatory knowing. And when I immerse myself in beautiful and uplifting songs through dance, and I manage to enter that flow state, my perspective, you know, can alter. It might become lifted, and I start to see reality more vividly, and, you know, like I activate my, you know, ability to see, and this is also what prayer can do, and what it does. It has, you know, the ability to lift you up the mountaintop, so to say, and so that you can experience holiness and truth, and see clearly, because that what you, I think, a straightforward way, an easy way to experience holiness is to actually climb a mountain and reach to the top, and that's when you know, feel like you're close to heaven, you're close to wisdom, you can see all things below of you, and you feel like your state of agency has leveled up, so to speak. You can You don't feel like a tail. You feel like the head, and yeah, it's a fantastic like feeling to be at the top. I think truth is actually a quality of truth is that it reduces complexity to us, and wisdom is this ability to see through illusion and into reality. So what does that mean? Like the ability to see through illusion. Well, if there's lies that have been told to you, you can see through those lies and into what is real. Wisdom is, we acquire it through reading and being curious about the world and about people. And so we have to be present. I'd also like to add here verse 20 from Matthew 18, where it says, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." So prayer then is the vehicle whereby we invite His Spirit to be with us. This is also what happens when I listen to certain Christian worship songs, and that some certain songs have that quality of purity, both in a melodic sense, in that the melody and the musical arrangement is a mirroring of the meaning and of the heart of God, and so there's a beautiful dance between the two, between the unseen and everything about music is unseen, but I think the music itself should carry the text with dignity. The meaning cannot be conveyed, in just any matter. I meant any manner. The love of the gospel, the love of God. I think there are many ways to express it, but I believe that there is an ontological reality to even music itself. You don't, like, if you want to make a baby sleep, you don't play certain music. You wouldn't play a hard heavy metal tune to a baby who's about to sleep, I think. So what does that mean? I think it means that there's a reality to music which is mysterious. All things exist in the mind of God, and He wants us to give Him our minds, hearts, and bodies. So there are no thing in itself that is evil. It's just how we use it and when. And so that's when we ought to use our perspectival knowing. And here's a quote by Vervaeke I like a lot. "I want to lose my freedom in this way. I want my thoughts to be completely determined by what is true. I want my actions to be completely determined by what is good. I want my sensibility to be completely determined by what's beautiful. And once I'm there, I don't want to lose that. And the degree to which I fall away from that is usually because of errors due to my freedom. Freedom, and this is great, I think. Freedom isn't an absolute, it's an instrumental good. There was a girl that my dad told me about who was asked, "Why do you think that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was placed in the garden?" And this girl said that God wanted to see if we would trust Him or not. And that's a wise answer, I think, that God is interested about a true relationship with us, and you have to be able to say yes or no to it. Otherwise, it's just power. And now, when it comes to the Babylonian perspective, that's an ontology of power. It's not an ontology of care. And so we're gonna listen now to the Bible project about Babylonian cosmology, which is very much like the Matrix, actually. Yeah, so now they're gonna speak about Babylonian ancient cosmology, and it's very interesting. This music is made by Evil Needle.
So here's one. It came to be called the Atrahasis epic. So you have a tier of just pre-existent deities. They just exist. But they exist in a really clear social order. You have Enlil, a guy named Enlil, who's kind of like Atum or An in these other ones.
Okay.
He's just there before everything else, the chief deity.
Okay.
And he's got two co-deities that he's made. One's called Anu, the sky ruler, and one called Enki, god of fresh water. Under them are the upper class deities called the Anunnaki, and then under them are the lower class deities who are called the Igigi. I like them, the Igigi.
You like them as a crew of deities?
Both I like their name, the Igigi.
Yeah.
But notice this is a concept of the deities existing
in a class order.
In a class order that mirrors precisely onto how Babylonian culture was ordered.
Right.
A very small number of people at the top.
You've got a couple rulers.
Yeah.
And then you got the upper class.
Correct.
And then you got the lower class.
Then you got the lower class. And so the Igigi are the ones who actually make the cosmos run.
Yeah, they're the workforce.
Yeah, they're slaves.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, they're not slaves. They don't have slaves yet. They just have the lower class.
Okay.
So the story begins with the Igigi being tired of providing food and clothing for all the gods above them. Mm-hmm. So they stage the first labor union walkout. They have this walkout and they grumble. They go to Enlil and they protest. And they say, all we'd ever do is work for you guys. We get no benefit out of it. Enlil and the Anunnaki, they send out these negotiators. And what they agree on is, hey, let's make some robots, some automatons, who will serve all of our needs for all of us. So
robots.
What's
Why'd
that?
you use the word robot?
Well, because that's how they're conceived of them, just like menial work machines.
Okay.
What we need is our work machines that will just do everything for us.
Got it, yeah.
And so what they do is they get a junior deity from the upper class, and they slit his throat, sacrifice him, and they pour out his blood on the clay, and they make humans.
So wait, the Igigi, the lower class,
Yes.
they're tired of feeding all the gods.
Yes.
They're like, we can probably outsource this to some
Totally.
even lower class.
Yeah, that doesn't exist yet.
Doesn't exist yet. And they're like, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
How are we going to do it? They take one of the higher class guys, but one of the kind of lower of the higher class guys.
Yeah, they
A
sacrifice
junior.
him.
And
Yeah.
they kill him,
Kill him
slit his throat,
Yeah.
mix the blood
with clay.
with clay, and produce humans.
This is the origin of humans. So imagine in a culture, this is the founding story.
So if I said, hey, if I lived as a ancient Babylonian, I was like, hey, Mom, where did this all come from?
Yeah.
And she would say, well, one of the gods slit the throat of another god,
Yeah.
mixed it with some dirt, and
Yeah.
that's where we are.
Yeah. Well, that's how we got here. Why we're here
It's
is to be slaves to the gods.
And then our purpose is...
And guess what? Our king says he's the physical embodiment of these gods, of these different, the upper class, the priests, and the kings claim to be the physical embodiments of these deities. That's convenient,
Yeah.
which means I'm their slave.
They're really telling a story about that we are to feed them.
Yeah, they're
Take care of
giving
them.
divine legitimation to...
Even though they were also produced from the same
Yeah, that's
blood
right.
clay sacrifice,
Yeah.
they're connected to these other gods in a way that we're
Yep,
not.
correct.
Okay.
So that's your founding story for the origin of humans. It's the blood of the gods plus clay makes humans to be slaves for the gods.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. It's hierarchy not based on care like the Christian cosmology would, presents. But Babel is, founded by Nimrod. I think that's a depiction of him in the picture, which means rebel, and he was a great hunter. It says in the Bible that he's a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Yeah, and so this, I hope this episode was interesting. See you in the next